Bitch. A word that simply describes a female canine. Yet, by the 15th century, it took on a far more loaded meaning when applied to women, implying aggression, unpleasantness, and dominance. But why? Why does female strength so often become something to insult, rather than to admire? This pattern isn't unique to language. It extends into science, history, and even our understanding of the natural world. If human societies have long dismissed female strength, is it any surprise that scientists have done the same? To challenge this stereotype, I will explore how gender bias has influenced the way we present and perceive animals. Along the way, we'll uncover forgotten cases that prove that female animals are far more complex, powerful, and influential than traditional science has led us to believe. So, what does it mean to be female in our natural world? Does it mean you must be passive, weaker? Is your role only that of a carer? For centuries, this is exactly what we've been told. Even Charles Darwin, one of the most prominent scientists in history, claimed, man is more courageous, pugnacious, and energetic than woman, and has a more inventive genius. This quote from his book, The Descent of Man, sold over 30,000 copies just in his lifetime. In this quote, Darwin was essentially saying the men were braver, ready to fight, stronger, and were smarter than women. This opinion was published worldwide in one of the most influential scientific journals ever. And this belief isn't new. In fact, it's as old as zoology itself. Aristotle, often called the father of zoology, wrote the first ever animal handbook on the generations of animals in ancient Greece. In it, he described the male as effective and active, whilst the female was just passive. These ideas weren't just scientific opinion. They became the foundations of how we saw gender itself. Now, if we fast forward to the Victorian era, a time where these weren't just social expectations, but were enforced by law, women were barred from voting, forced to resign from jobs during pregnancy, and even denied the right to own a passport or a bank account without a man's permission. They were treated not as individuals, but as possessions, submissive, dependent, and delicate. It's hard to believe that British women only gained the right to vote in 1918, and even then, they had to meet strict requirements. They had to be over 30, own property, and graduate from a prestigious university. This limited voting to women who were wealthy and privileged. It took another 10 years till 1928 for all women to vote on equal terms with men. And the basic and needed human services, like owning a bank account or a passport without a man's permission, didn't come until 1980. That's only 45 years ago. These aren't ancient injustices. They're uncomfortably recent. And if this is how humans viewed women, it's no surprise that they assumed female animals must be the same, right? Wrong. Here's the truth. Nature does not follow human-made gender roles. Due to the majority of scientific studies carried out by men, knowledge about the female species existed, but was overlooked or undervalued due to prevailing biases. Male scientists failed to mention the female lemurs of Madagascar, who constantly dominate their species, both physically and politically. Females have privilege to food and other resources, and have the physical ability to displace a male if they want. This was known for centuries, but was underreported in mainstream science. It took another 200 years for researchers to confirm that female lemurs constantly dominate males in both social and resource-based interactions. Another unusual and overlooked example is the female mole. The female mole has evolved what's called ovotestes. This means her reproductive system can produce testosterone and eggs. This testosterone is used to beef up her muscles to fuel for her digging and for aggression to protect her pups, since she's a single mother. Biologists had noted the aggressive behaviour of female moles, but the biological presence of the ovotestes was not well understood or studied. It wasn't until just 5 years ago that researchers confirmed that this adaptation gives them the strength and aggression needed to arguably be one of the best mothers in the animal kingdom. A more recent discovery are the female albatross couples in Hawaii. These female-female pairs engage in cooperative parenting, jointly incubating eggs and raising chicks together as a family. The success of this challenges the traditional binary male and female parent roles in the animal kingdom. Human biases around sexuality meant that scientific recognition of this didn't emerge until the early 2000s, when researchers found that around 30% of nesting couples were female-female. Although this isn't the majority, it was assumed for a long time that the parents were exclusively male and female, reflecting human biases around monogamy and reproduction. But one of the most incredible examples for the female species is sexual cannibalism. In species such as the praying mantis or black widow spider, females sometimes consume their mate during or after mating. This behaviour can increase her nutritional intake, which benefits her reproductive system and enhancing the survival of her offspring. These behaviours illustrate extreme strategies of female dominance and resourcefulness in the natural world. But this discovery was initially dismissed as exaggerated or exceptional, and it took another 300 years for this to confirm that this behaviour does enhance her productive success. So, we've looked at the females. Now let's look at the other hand. What does it mean to be male then? Does it mean you must be strong, manly, brave, to hide your gentle and caring side? Well, what about the male satin bowerbirds that go to great lengths to paint their nest walls blue? They do this by getting a chewed up berry and putting it on the end of a stick, just like a paintbrush. And why do they do this strange behaviour? All because the females like the colour blue. And what about the male seahorses that carry the pregnancy and deliver the offspring instead of the females? And the research that shows the more experience a male seahorse has as being a father, the more attractive they are to women. And finally, what about the red-caped mannequin bird that displays multicoloured feathers, elaborate songs and dancing, tapping into the stereotypes normally associated with women? For all the men in the room, take inspiration from these examples and use them as guidelines to positively empower yourselves and to inspire the brilliant women around you. Because, unfortunately, science has long presented females as the weaker sex, but biology tells a different story. There are many more incredible examples that disprove binary expectations of behaviour, brains, body, and biology. It's time to challenge outdated perceptions and recognise the true diversity of female power, both in nature and in society. Because if nature does not conform to these outdated gender roles, then why should we? As a girl who's been in positions of leadership, the word bitch has been used to my face and behind my back as a way to shame and degrade me. There was an expectation to be polite, careful, quiet, not take up space. But nature, on the other hand, never told women to shrink themselves or to stand down. So, the next time you're tempted to use the term bitch to describe a woman, consider calling her a praying mantis or black widow instead, a creature whose assertiveness by eating males ensures her successes. Or perhaps, female lemur is more appropriate, since she's leading just like nature intended her to. But maybe the real question isn't why we use the word bitch as an insult at all, but why we're so afraid of female power in the first place. Thank you.
Make way, automobile approaching. These would have been the words of a man in 1865, walking 60 yards in front of a freshly painted, revolutionary black car, waving a small red flag. Such was the fear around this new technology that it was mandated by law to have a warning flag bearer. A sensible precaution perhaps, but the fear of the unknown led to this technology being inhibited. If the car could only go as fast as the man walking, then was it any better than simply walking to your destination? Today, of course, we don't need someone waving a red flag to drive a car, but the fear of the unknown, especially around emerging technologies, certainly has not gone away. Today's technological equivalent, artificial intelligence, and the fear associated with it is now even more widespread. As far back as 2014, scientist Stephen Hawking warned that artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. This fear is reflected in current public opinion, with a third of adults recently telling the ONS that they feel AI is more of a threat than a benefit to society. But what exactly is this technology, and does it have the power to end humanity as Hawking feared? Artificial intelligence might seem to be today's new buzzword, but fundamentally, AI is machine learning. Computers that use advanced pattern recognition. AI systems don't think like humans do. Instead, they analyze vast amounts of data, find patterns within that data, and then make predictions based on those patterns. When I type a sentence, the answer given is just the most likely next sequence of words, instead of a thought-through answer. If I type the capital of England, the most likely next word is London, so AI would generate that. And this technology isn't new. Since the 1990s, AI has quietly worked behind the scenes, from email spam filters to bank fraud detections, learning from patterns to keep us safe. But more recently, companies such as OpenAI have made this technology accessible to everyday consumers, with ChatGPT being used from writing emails, doing homework, and even writing public speeches. And this increased use has brought greater scrutiny. Before getting into the ethics, just running these computers is controversial. Increasingly vast data centers demand electricity. So much so that in 2022, AI was already responsible for 2% of global energy demand, and this is only increasing. These abstract ideas have very real consequences for real communities, with Elon Musk's XAI being criticized for its polluting gas turbines in Memphis, Tennessee, that have been causing toxic pollution to the local community. As well as fossil fuels, AI makes demand for other resources too, with recent estimates from the University of California suggesting just one ChatGPT search to write a 100-word email needs 500 millilitres of water to cool the data servers responsible. That's just 3 queries needing as much water as a human needs per day, and ChatGPT alone records over 7 billion queries a week. At a time where climate change is intensifying and population growth is placing a strain on freshwater, this use is clearly unsustainable. And what of the ethics involved in artificial intelligence? AI demands vast amounts of data in order to produce better outputs. So where does this data come from? how does AI predict the word London? Well, often this is scraped from the internet, with websites and privately sold databases being used in legally ambiguous training models. Beyond the obvious copyright infringement, this has a direct impact on the creative and low-level administrative workforce, with estimates that up to 85 million jobs could be lost as a result of AI this year alone. So, as AI inevitably becomes more advanced, maybe it is about time we wave the red flag. It's time we apply our own crash barriers to AI and ensure it is controlled through tough and coordinated government action. This will allow AI to be used as a positive tool that improves people's lives, but with restrictions on the environmental impact it is allowed to have. Solutions are already being explored, such as renewable energy, or even Meta signing a 20-year deal to recommission and use a small-scale nuclear reactor, or new AI models, such as DeepSeek, that need less computing power to train. Likewise, intervention in the legality and regulations of AI would help to ensure it is safe and secure, with companies then adapting to the new legal environment. Then, as we ourselves adapt and adjust to AI in our daily lives, we can slowly recall the red flag map and allow AI to flourish. The issue that seems less likely to be resolved so easily if we do allow AI to flourish is the fear of AI replacing human jobs and tasks. The reason that this fear is so drastic, it could very well be right. What if AI is faster, more efficient, and a higher quality, then what's left for me to do? Well, surprisingly, it's more than I once thought. Firstly, what about AI in entertainment? Often, AI is portrayed in films and TV as a world-ending villain, like in The Terminator, or even the latest Mission Impossible movie. But what if the AI was the one making our entertainment? Imagine if instead of watching a real game of sport, such as football, people watch an artificially generated match. While the match itself might be entertaining and contain all the latest tricks and skills, the key aspects of sport that make it truly something to get emotionally invested into, the passion, the risk, and the emotion would be lost. It's the unpredictability of sport that makes it emotionally addictive. And if that is lost to a series of probabilities and predictions generated by AI, then football fans would simply not tune in to watch these matches. So, what about the workplace? We can't all be footballers, but we do share some similarities, just played on a different field. Like sport, work isn't about making the perfect outcome. It's the process that matters. It's the challenges, the imperfections, and the personal growth that give it meaning. That's something typing a prompt into ChatGPT can't replace. If we let AI speak for us too often, we risk losing vital, human skills like communication, self-expression, and the confidence to stand up to authority and challenge injustice. So, rather than being in an office full of AI bots, instead, we can embrace AI as a tool to help us, using the 80-20 rule. This rule states that it is 20% of our effort that leads to 80% of our results. This means the remaining 80% of our effort is devoted to insignificant and mundane tasks, those meetings that should have been an email. If we use AI as a tool to free up our time, it will allow us to really focus on that 20% of effort and work that is the most important, where we can develop and utilize our human skills to a greater extent, making this a more meaningful use of our time that would be more rewarding and more enjoyable. This isn't a replacement by AI, it will be a shift, where AI liberates us from the drudgery of work, freeing us to shift to tasks and roles that empower meaningful work. This work may be in jobs we don't even know exist yet. Even 20 years ago, many people would not have imagined a job or even a degree being in artificial intelligence, and now it is estimated to employ nearly 100 million people worldwide. This mirrors the patterns of other technological revolutions. Jobs may be lost in some sectors, such as agriculture in the Industrial Revolution, but these were replaced in factories, or in the case of AI, with coders and developers, or jobs that today we don't even realize that we need. Jobs will change, instead of being lost outright. So, how will this happen? First, we do need to wave the red flag and give ourselves time to place crash barriers around AI, like we have to cars. But then, we must adapt. Adapt how we work, how we use AI, and crucially, how we educate. We must integrate AI into our daily lives to avoid falling behind, while we protect and foster what makes us irreplaceable. Not just creativity, but creative problem solving, critical thinking, and the emotional intelligence that builds true, personal connections. These are the skills taught in schools, but crucially, they are our human advantages, the qualities no algorithm can replace. This isn't about beating the machines, it's about harnessing them to strengthen our humanity. AI might master data, but it will never understand joy, humour, or heartbreak. They are what will set us apart in the age of AI. So no, AI won't replace us or end the human race, as Hawking feared, unless we forget how to be human. The choice is ours. Let's choose wisely.
This evening, I would like to talk to you all about laughter, but I would like to start that conversation with a question. Does anyone else feel like the world is totally going to pot? I mean, things are getting worse, right? And we all seem utterly powerless to stop this great wave of misery from washing over us in a tsunami of tears, sweeping us away. That wasn't a joke. If there's one thing which reinforces this idea, it's the fact that we had to invent a new word just to describe our obsession with negativity. Doom scrolling. This term was first coined in 2018, and it describes the act of compulsively scrolling through news and social media, where the content is overwhelmingly upsetting and distressing. It is characterized by an obsessive, anxious impulse towards despair, which blurs from post to post without end. Studies are emerging which suggest our connection to this habit is influencing our identity, our political perceptions, our self-worth, and our relationships. It is supported by a mass media machine hell-bent on feeding our addiction to malaise. It's no wonder why so many of us feel the inertia of a downward spiral, particularly my generation, which must find a way to navigate this world. But I am here with a solution. It's dreadfully simple, awfully contagious, and you can do it right now for free. It's laughter. You don't laugh enough. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this evening, it's that. No one in this room does. And while I won't try to convince you that we can instantaneously fix everything that's wrong about the world just by having a giggle, I do want to explore why we laugh, what happens to our brains and our bodies when we laugh, and how you can start to change the world around you, one knock-knock joke at a time. First, my qualifications. I have spent an inordinate amount of time laughing from the age of 3 months old. And no, it wasn't cute, because my dad said I was ugly and laughed like Sid James. Others have called it a cackle, some have called it a pirate laugh, and certainly not ladylike. But if laughter is uncontrollable, if it comes out whether or not it's pretty or cackly or raspy, then laughter is a representation of ourselves, bursting out without pretense or societal expectations. In fact, what we laugh at makes us who we are. We all have that special brand of comedy which just tickles us. I mean, don't all of us have that one joke that just clicked with us at some point and we tell time and time again, much to the dismay of our loved ones? Let me tell you mine. There are these two guys robbing an off-license, and as they're shoving all of these alcohol bottles into their bags, one turns to the other and says, "Hey, do you think this is whiskey?" And the other guy says, "Yeah, but not as risky as robbing a bank. Now, if you laughed at that, I'll assume for your sake that it was a pity laugh, because that is an awful joke. Now might be a good time to tell you that comedy is subjective. That's right. It's not me, it's you. Of course I'm kidding. But why do some of us find the content of jokes funnier than others? Why can comedy be so subjective? It doesn't just depend on the joke itself, but also on the culture, the receiver's cognitive processing, the context, and also the timing. It's something that's truly quite hard to master. So first of all, culture can play a big role in this. So for a minute, I'd like to imagine you're all learning English as a second language. And I came up to you and said, I never wanted to believe that my dad was stealing from his job as a road worker. But when I got home, all the signs were there. Now, if you didn't find that funny, you're proving my thesis correct, because I thought that was hilarious when I first heard it. But in this case, the word signs has two meanings, which you might not see if English was your second language. And with this being an international school, I do choose to blame the language barrier when people don't laugh at my jokes. Secondly, your cognitive processing will make a difference to whether you find a joke funny or not. In this case, I'm referring to the way that your mind perceives and expects twists or anything unusual. This is because if you're above average intelligence, it's likely that it's a lot easier for you to spot the upcoming punchline. Whereas, if you're a thicko like me, most jokes are as surprising as Rishi Sunak discovering the price of bread. Lastly, there's context. We don't just laugh for the sake of it. At times, we laugh specifically to make a bad situation better. In this case, comedy equals tragedy plus time. In an awkward meeting, on a bad first date, or like the other day when I was at a funeral, and everyone was loudly arguing about which herb went best with which fish, and all I could think about was that it wasn't the time or the place. A bit of a slow pickup on that one, huh? I mean, raise your hands if you've ever been in an inappropriate situation and made a joke just to break the silence. Congratulations, we are all awful people. So, okay, comedy is subjective, we know this. And some of us are definitely funnier than others. I, unfortunately, know this. But why do we enjoy laughing so much? Why does every person on earth make this strange sound despite their language? What happens to our brains and our bodies when we laugh? Our doom-scrolling habits have been shown to spike the main stress-inducing hormone, cortisol, creating a population with latent stress, anxiety, depression, all caused by the incessant flicking of thumbs on our screens. However, when you laugh, your body swaps cortisol with some much nicer neurotransmitters, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. Dopamine, as some of you may already know, provides feelings of pleasure, satisfaction, motivation. But it can also play a role in your motivation, your learning, your sleep, your mood. Oxytocin, also known as the love hormone, can play a role in both the male and female reproductive systems. It helps control the release of milk after birth. It helps with contractions when getting the baby out. And it helps with, how do I put this? Getting the baby in. But that's not what this speech is about. When you laugh, oxytocin influences the important elements of human behaviour, such as social recognition, relationship formation, and emotional attachment. It's literally true that the people who laugh together stay together. And finally, endorphins, the body's personal painkillers. They alleviate pain, reduce stress, and improve your overall mood. To top this all off, we have these things called mirror neurons, which are a class of neurons that cause individuals to mimic or mirror the act of another individual. It's the same reason why we yawn when we see others yawn, or even when we hear the word yawn. It's how laughter becomes so contagious. It's kind of like secondhand smoke, but better, obviously, and far more addictive. This brings me to my final point. The reason why I don't just want you to laugh alone, but to go out into the world and spread laughter with as many people as possible, willing or unwilling. We need to laugh. It is an act of pure defiance in the face of a media system designed to keep us burying our heads in the sand or fighting with each other. It is an act of agency against the mind-numbing doom-scrolling that's rotting our brains. It is a universal language in spite of every effort to inspire division and hatred. I started this speech doing my utmost to make you feel depressed. And now, I hope, if you share my dreadful sense of humour, you all feel a little lighter. That is the power we have. If we're more likely to laugh with other people than move, spread the contagious virus of laughter, or the medicine, whichever it is. Subject your friends to your awful jokes. Make people's faces burst in raucous guffaws or cringe in painful disgust. Maybe even make them pee a little. And maybe, if laughter really is the best medicine, then perhaps this speech was just one long prescription with absolutely no dosage instructions and the sort of pharmacist that's always under investigation. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm going to begin by asking if everyone left-handed could please raise that left hand. Okay, looks about right, should be around 10%. Well, if we go back to 1450, you lucky people would have been associated with the devil and probably burnt at the stake for the crime of witchcraft. In Victorian schools, you would have been beaten if you even dared to use that dominant left hand. That oppression can be traced back to the Latin word sinistra, meaning left. Does anyone recognise what this sounds like? Sinister. There you go. The word became linked to bad luck and evil, fueling centuries of prejudice left-handed people often faced. Thankfully, as we can see today, left-handed people no longer face that kind of extreme prejudice. At least I hope not. If I'm wrong, please let me know. The good news is that because there's much less stigma around being left-handed nowadays, we see a lot more left-handed people in the world. When society stops punishing differences, those differences can thrive. This evening, I will be discussing how intolerance faced by queer people, meaning non-heterosexual people, and people whose gender identity does not correspond with their birth sex, has fluctuated throughout time and location, leading us to where we are today. A discussion which has risen in recent years is that there has been an increase in queer people, with jokes being made like, there must be something in the water, or parents claiming that things like RuPaul's Drag Race is making their children queer. Now, I'm going to let you into a secret that might come as a shock. Queer people have always existed. Okay, how can I prove this? Well, there's the claim that queerness isn't natural, but there are approximately 1,500 different species that display queer tendencies. These include bonobos, dolphins, and penguins. For example, male giraffes actually engage in same-sex activity far more frequently than with females. Animals aren't watching TikTok, Instagram, or scrolling on Twitter. But to be fair, I think recently we all wish we weren't. My point is that queerness wasn't pushed on to animals. It is important in their social roles, like how same-sex activity helps female bonobos bond, cooperate, and form alliances. Was this convincing enough to show naturally occurring queerness? Alright, as a historian, I'm qualified to take you all on a trip in my own time machine to ancient Greece. If we look at Greek mythology, specifically the major deities of the Greek pantheon, the 12 Olympians, we will see plentiful amounts of queer representation. Let's take Apollo, for example, and his tragic love story with Hyacinthus. Hyacinthus, a young mortal Spartan prince, was renowned for his unparalleled beauty, leading the god of the sun to fall in love with him. Throughout their relationship, Apollo would teach the prince how to play the lyre, use a bow and arrow, and to hunt. But while teaching him to throw discus, their story took a turn for the worse. Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, changed the direction of the wind, pushing the disc to fatally hit the prince. Zephyrus, however, was also in love with Hyacinthus. Now, I know what you're all thinking. The queer love triangles we all know and love aren't just on Netflix, and they've existed for centuries. Their story ends with the somber gesture of Apollo using Hyacinthus' spilled blood to create the hyacinth flower. To put this simply, queerness was celebrated. It was not seen as against nature or religion. As we've seen, their gods were queer. But when did the attitude towards queerness change? Well, the first recorded acts of criminalization against queerness were in 1290, with two medieval treatises, Fleta and Britain, against sodomy. Punishments included being buried alive or being burnt to death. These treaties created a pattern of prejudice, one that could be seen centuries later in Victorian-era England. During Victorian times, queerness was hidden, seen as taboo. Queerness existed in a world of strict social rules and harsh laws, but it was never erased. The Labuscha Amendment of 1885 made any act of gross indecency between men a crime, even in private, and led to devastating prosecutions like that of Oscar Wilde. Trans and gender non-conforming people have also existed throughout history, and the Victorian era was no exception. Stella Bouton and Fanny Parr, both male at birth, lived openly as women, but were arrested in 1870 for cross-dressing. These laws didn't just punish individuals, they created a culture of silence and shame, making it dangerous for queer people to live openly or love who they choose. As we know, queer criminalisation continued through the 1900s in the UK until the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, which legalised private queer acts between two consenting adults. But the fight for equality gained new momentum from global events, most notably the Stonewall Uprising in New York in 1969, where queer people resisted a police raid at the Stonewall Inn, sparking days of protest. This rebellion was a turning point, igniting the modern pride movement and inspiring activists around the world to organise, march and demand their rights, continuing to fight for the 1980s AIDS crisis. But where are we in history right now? We are definitely in a new period, one growing away from prejudice and towards acceptance, surely. In the UK, the legalisation of same-sex marriage in 2014 was a landmark moment for queer rights, allowing same-sex couples to marry and have their relationships legally recognised. Alongside this, important protections like the Equality Act 2010 have helped combat discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Queer people have more rights than ever before, right? Then why have I just spent the past 5 months crafting this 10-minute speech to you all? Well, I want to tell you the story of a friend of mine, my trans childhood best friend. For him, being queer was never a way of life or something that defines him as a person. It was simply just something that he happened to be. When he first acknowledged the nagging feeling that he wasn't a girl, he didn't find himself planning his future or excited to start his transition. Instead, what played through his head was all the things he'd miss out on, what could have been. He realised that he'd never get to be a mother and have children of his own, or walk down the aisle in a white gown. And he believed that perhaps he'd never even get to fall in love. He felt like he was betraying the little girl he used to be, while also mourning the boyhood that he never got to have. He had a very hard time living with his identity and trying to accept it. He often used to think if living as a girl would have been better, if his life would be more filled with love and joy. This led him multiple times to try and accept the body he was prescribed at birth. And for a time, she was good. She was easy, but she wasn't right. So he had to let the girlhood he clung to for so long go. And it wasn't easy, but it did feel right. Just recently, the United Kingdom Supreme Court ruled that under the country's equality laws, the word woman refers strictly to biological sex, not to gender identity. This means that even trans women who have gone through the legal process to obtain a gender recognition certificate are no longer seen as women for the purposes of the Equality Act. The decision will have sweeping consequences for access to women-only spaces and services, like changing rooms, domestic violence shelters, and healthcare. I'm going to speak to you honestly and say that this topic is difficult. There are so many different opinions, experiences, and I do not know all the solutions. But
What I do know, what history has shown me, is that fear and violence is never the answer. Segregation at water fountains and schools was not the answer. Not sharing a toilet seat or even shaking hands with a homosexual because of fear during the AIDS crisis was not the answer. This leaves those groups, those human beings, feeling dirty, isolated. We are enforcing alienation. This is where we are in history right now. A time where I have to watch someone I grew up with since I was 4 struggle to feel safe in his own home. His queerness was always something inside of him. It's never led him or dictated who he was as a person. Queerness is a community. It can be loud, proud, and vibrant. But it's also just something that normal people are. It's not some arbitrary alien concept or something entirely out of the ordinary. In fact, it seems to my friend and to millions of others to be the most natural thing in the world. I think it's better defined as the joy of knowing that you are who you were meant to be. Gen Z as a generation are often known to be snowflakes, lazy, striving to be individuals. And it's true, they do have the highest number of people identifying as queer. But do you know what they also have the highest amount of? Left-handed people. When society stops punishing differences, those differences can thrive. Thank you for listening.